Outsourcing is an act whereby a company transfers a bit of its internal activities and decision making to a source outside the premises. The reasons for outsourcing are usually not cost driven. However, over a period of time, cost based calculations have been the core drivers for outsourcing. If the cost savings are substantial, it does make a huge difference in the short term to move these processes outside. But one way of looking at it is like this: if you're going to move a part of the process outside, you're going to lose control on it. That means, by some definition, you have been able to come to a conclusion that this particular aspect which you're moving outside your company can actually work on itself. That means it's independent. That again means that it is not a set of dependent activities that deliver a product. This particular activity is an add-on, and hence one is able to see it in isolation and then conclude that this can be moved out. However, the original outsourcing reasons were many. One was a better control, because you focused only on the activities that you do well, and you moved those activities that you didn't do well outside your premises. Sometimes the reason why you outsourced was the technology that was required to perform a certain operation was not in your control, and since the investment in this technology was so huge and one needed high volumes to justify investment, those high volumes were achieved by supplying to many buyers. Sometimes you also thought that the development of technology was better or at a higher pace to this outside source, so you used their development to aid yours, and you did not bring all those activities inside. One of the common examples is a heat treatment process. If you are an automobile component manufacturer, you have a heat treatment process where you transform the raw material, that is a steel, into a slightly harder steel, which can then perform its desired function better. In this heat treatment process, we actually heat the steel to a certain temperature, and at that temperature we change the environment by injecting a higher carbon content gas onto these steels, so that the carbon particles get deposited on the surface, and then with a cooling process in place, this hardened carbon particles on the surface have much higher resilience to abrasion, whereas the core, which is the inner part, is less subjected to the carbon. It is not that resilient to abrasion, but it is now less brittle also. That means it can take shocks better. Anyway, this particular behavior is desired of many components, and to achieve this behavior, that means the outer surface being much tougher than the core, can be achieved by heat treatment process. Now, heat treatment process requires huge investments, requires the operation to be run well for certain volumes, requires a much bigger area, requires different set of technology and techniques and skill sets to produce. So if there is a component manufacturer which just makes, let's say, X number of gears, and this is only 1/100th of the installed capacity for the heat treatment process, by this I mean that the heat treatment process, which is good to produce components of high quality, has a minimum installation capacity at which it becomes viable, and hence the installation has a very high capacity, And this particular component manufacturer needs to use this technology but doesn't have enough volumes. And many times the heat treatment capabilities itself are not available. So many of the small component manufacturers, or for that matter big component manufacturers, may then aggregate and send their component to this heat treatment shop. Now this is an outsourcing. But this outsourcing is primarily decided because that particular manufacturer or a supplier has the capability to make sure that the products or the heat treatment is done to the highest degree. We used outsourcing for this. Similarly, electroplating, many times dyeing of fabric, many times coating of certain material in electronic components is being sent to specialists, and this is outsourced. Outsourcing, when done based on this unique performance, that means you're utilizing a special characteristics of this source, is the right reason for which you should outsource. Or if you apply the principles of supply chain or the principles of flow, and if by outsourcing your flow increases, then you should outsource. But it's quite likely that when you send your component out for processing, the transportation time really goes up and the inventory actually slows down in your manufacturing system. Not only slows down, it also gets batched together, because now you're sending a bigger batch to be processed outside. And if you don't have a situation where one of the intermediate steps gets outsourced, that means only your source gets outsourced, that means your raw material gets processed by an outside source and is brought within, and then you then go on to do all the subsequent processes. This outsourcing is good because you are bringing in a processed material and all subsequent operations are then performed within the company and sent out. That means the flow does not get hindered. But what you have done? By getting in a processed material, raw material inside, your input raw material cost has gone up. And that would mean that the throughput of the system has gone down. So there are going to be conditions where an outsourcing is good and an outsourcing is not so good. Now, what is the condition in which outsourcing is good? Outsourcing is good if you are able to use a good technology of somebody else for your purpose, or you are not able to make a big investments to get a better quality and you're using that person's production capability for your use. But if by doing this the total throughput of your system goes down, it is a bad investment on outsourcing. That means the selling price minus all the direct expenses that you're putting into a component manufacturing, if this throughput is less or keeps reducing as you outsource, it is not a good outsourcing concept. Somewhere down the line, you have to think hard that how should I increase the throughput of my company? That means how can I add more processes so that the difference between the selling price and the direct cost, that means all the money that you have spent on buying the raw material as well as all the money you have spent on processing it, which can be directly assigned to it. That means can be directly assigned to it if you got it serviced or sourced from outside, that means processed outside If the difference between the direct cost and selling price is good, that means it's substantial, then you are adding a lot of throughput to your company. Many times people forget that by reducing their work, that means the reason why they're outsourcing is they don't want to be involved in doing certain activities, because some cost calculations have showed them that it's cheaper to get it done from outside, they outsource. In doing that, they are also directly reducing the throughput of their organization and indirectly increasing the cost of operation. The reason why I say this is, assume there is a product which has a raw material of 20 rupees and selling price of 100 rupees. Your company buys the raw material, processes it full and sends it out. So the throughput from this product to your company is 80 rupees. You find doing one of the processes cumbersome. Somebody does a calculation, says, sir, this process, because of our capabilities, costs us 10 rupees. But if we get it done from outside, that fellow will charge us only 9 rupees. You decide to send the process outside. So now your total throughput is 20 rupees raw material and 9 rupees the processing cost. The throughput, which was 80 rupees earlier, has now become 71 rupees. By doing this, has your any of the operating expense gone down? Did you fire any employees? Did a huge expense got reduced? No, but your throughput has gone down. If your throughput had gone up by outsourcing, it was nice, but actually your throughput has gone down. Now, the reason why we sent it out was we didn't want to do that activity. So have you actually removed the manpower which was doing that activity? Have you actually removed the machine that was doing the activity? Or if you have just reallocated the manpower from here to somewhere else, if only that has happened, that means your total operating expense has remained constant, and this is a bad outsourcing. But there's another aspect to outsourcing. Suppose you're using a particular technology of a supplier, and if this supplier decides to backward integrate or forward integrate, that means if he decides to add 2 more processes in front of it, he may just become the most important value addition or value adder to the whole component. He is a threat to you. Very soon, over a period of time, he will start adding more and more processes. That means he'll keep increasing the throughput of his system and start challenging you. You may just land up being a dealer or an intermediary, because most of the throughput of this component is taken away by a supplier. So when you are outsourcing, you need to understand under which conditions are you outsourcing. If by outsourcing the throughput of the organization for that component keeps going down, it's a bad decision. You may keep calculating that I think the cost is going down. That means what was being done, the assumption was if it was done in 9 rupees, now it's being done in 8 rupees. But this 8 rupees is not within your organization, it is going out of the system. That means there's another person, another supplier who's earning this 8 rupees from you. Your organization is not earning it anymore. If you keep doing this, you would have to reduce your manufacturing base. That means the number of people employed in direct manufacturing will go down. You'll have more people who are only now involved in managing the suppliers. That means you're paying more money to the managers, and this again after some time will come back to you as haunting as your overheads have gone up. And once these overheads go up, again your cost of manufacturing will show an increase. So you'll outsource more. So if you are outsourcing based purely on costs, you're running a big risk. But if outsourcing is because you have a need for a technology, because there is a certain minimum size criteria which you're not able to meet, and your processing person is able to accumulate or aggregate enough components to get his volumes, we use that. They are good reasons for outsourcing. Or if the person is able to increase the flow of material through the system, that's good outsourcing. There's another aspect. Many times when we outsource, we look at the processes as cheap and expensive. A cheaper process may take more time. A faster process may take less time. Now again, this type of outsourcing based on cost is against the principles of flow. And if the cheaper process, which takes more time, is chosen over a process which is faster, it will lead to a situation where a huge amount of inventory gets blocked in the system. And this will then directly impact your throughput time. That means you will start missing deliveries, and then lead to you having more capital locked up as WIP, or the requirement of working capital will go up.